It is Benoit Saint Denis fight week. It is UFC 315 fight week. Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena in Montreal. We're going to be going through the full card, predictions, breakdown, analysis, picks, you name it. I'm going to be breaking it down, starting off with the first fight of the night. Beksat Almakhan versus Brad Katona. We saw Beksat make his UFC debut on short notice versus none other than Umar Nurmagomedov. And while he did lose all 3 rounds, he got smudged into the canvas for 15 straight minutes. He did actually end up getting a knockdown about a minute into the fight versus Umar. So although he lost, he did show some potential, some flash, some power. This guy is pretty much a pure striker. Of course, he is from Kazakhstan. He's from the Balkan area. So he is going to be able to wrestle somewhat, but I'm going to be giving Katona the wrestling advantage in this fight, especially since Almakhan is a striker and he did get held down by Umar. It is Umar Nurmagomedov, but we just can't see that much control time from your opponent in a fight. So of course, he's only 1-0, but a very, very obviously tough opponent to fight in your short notice debut, and that's his only fight in the UFC. He's 11-1 outside of the UFC and outside of that fight. And we can look at Brad Katona here. He's kind of crazy. He's only 33 years old. You'd think he'd be much older. Katona is he's not a finisher, as you can see. He's gotten 1 finish since 2018, only has 5 finishes out of his 16 wins. This guy is just going to go 500 in the UFC, and probably under 500 if they actually give him, better competition. But we saw him go 1-2 in his UFC stint back in 2019. He did fight Merab Dvalishvili, but lost to Hunter Azure, terrible loss. Then wins the Ultimate Fighter for the second time, gets on a nice little win streak to get on the Ultimate Fighter. Wins the Ultimate Fighter again versus Cody Gibson, not that high level. Loses to Garrett Armfield as a pretty solid favorite at the beginning of last year. Beats one of the worst UFC fighters in modern day, Jesse Butler. This guy got slept by Jim Miller and won. Shouldn't have been signed to the UFC, just was a short notice replacement. That's the only reason he was in the UFC. And then did lose to Gene Matsumoto as well. A little bit of a competitive fight, but Matsumoto is a tough opponent. Arguably beat Rob Font. We saw the strikes were pretty even, but Matsumoto landed the better damage. Katona's only game plan in pretty much every fight is just to try and grapple. He doesn't land too much damage. He does get into some scraps. We saw with Cody Gibson and Matsumoto, there were some pretty good strikes landed and absorbed for Katona. So every once in a while, he will end up in a scrap, but his main game plans are to grapple, to wrestle, basically to control his opponent and get the decision win. I'm going to be picking Almakhan here. He's a -175 favorite. There's just no excitement in picking Brad Katona, and at this point, it doesn't seem like he's going to be anything in the UFC. What is he? 4-5 in his UFC in his career. He's 3-4 in the UFC. Although he did win the Ultimate Fighter twice, he's just not an appealing pick. He's got 1 knockout in his 20 fight career. It's just not somebody that I want to be backing most of the time, especially versus Almakhan, who's a flashy guy, a high finish rate from Kazakhstan. Dropped Umar Nurmagomedov, who is mainly a striker, if you guys didn't know, in his short notice debut. So that's what I really like to see. He's got a nice 3.5-inch reach advantage to go along with his striking prowess. So I'm going to take him in this fight to open up the card. Next fight, Daniel Santos versus Jung Yong Lee. Priced at around a pick'em. We got Daniel Santos here, not a fighter that competes very often. In fact, he hasn't fought this year or last year. The last time he fought was 2023, and that was only once in that year as well. He's only 2-1 in the UFC, but they're 2 decent opponents. Julio Arce, he did get kind of battered in that fight, took over 100 significant strikes in the 3 rounds. but gets a great bounce back knockout win over John Castaneda, who I am pretty high on. He's definitely a tough out, a tough guy to finish in the UFC, so I really do rate that win. And then gets a decision win over Johnny Munoz, who isn't a notable fighter, but did what he had to do in that fight. Like I said, he's not active whatsoever. He does train at Shootabox with Charles Oliveira, and I guess Ian Gary and all those other guys. So, a great gym he's training at. On the other side, you got Jung Ho Lee. He's 11-2. Gets knocked out brutally in a minute versus Haider Emil. If you guys don't know that fight, Emil literally just was swinging right out of the gate. Landed about a 40 punch combination on Lee, and eventually got the knockout. This was the last 10 seconds of Holloway Gaethje, but for a minute straight. It was absolutely wild. And he came into that fight as around a -230 favorite. So before that, both these guys are 2-1 in the UFC, very, very similar records. He had a pretty dominant win over Blake Bilder. I'm not really too high on Blake Bilder, but it was a dominant 3-round decision nonetheless, and then gets a split decision win in his UFC debut. This is a very close fight to pick. It's very tough. Santos is going to be coming in a little bit undersized. I'm going to be going with Jung Ho Lee here. He's got the size advantage. He's got the reach advantage as well. Santos is going to be looking to land that knockout blow. Both guys have decently high finish rates. This should be a very entertaining fight. I think Lee will come back and get a bounce back win after that Haider Emil knockout. Low key, a little bit fluky, I'm not going to lie, but I think he could land a knockout, and I would favor him to go and get a decision win as well. So if it goes the 15 minutes, I would favor Lee to get the job done. So we're going to be going with him in this fight. Next up, Bruno Silva versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Yikes. Bruno Silva, one of the craziest, records I've ever seen. He's 20-0 by knockout, but 0-7 by submission. So you can definitely call him a pretty much pure striker. He doesn't want to go to the ground with you. And he did take down Sharamagomedov a bunch of times in that fight, and he literally got outstruck on top position. So that shows you really how bad this guy's ground game is, especially being a Brazilian guy. That's pretty surprising, but I mean, he has not looked good. He's lost 4 in a row. He's won 1 of his last 7 fights, beginning with this Alex Pereira fight, which was one of the best performances we've seen versus Poatan. But gets submitted by GM3 in the 3rd round. Gets a nice knockout over Brad Tavares. So, that's a pretty nice performance. Finishing Brad Tavares, a tough guy to get out of there. That's pretty impressive, but submitted by Brendan Allen. I think he got knocked down as well before that submission. Fights Sharamagomedov in his debut. Gets a few takedowns, but just gets blatantly outstruck all 3 rounds. Clear decision against him. And then he loses. His last 2 fights are specifically pretty worrying. He does lose to old man Chris Weidman by decision. I think this was the fight where Chris Weidman landed the big ol' eye poke knockout. So I think they changed it to a decision after that, but losing to Chris Weidman is pretty ridiculous. And then he loses almost gets dominated by Ismail Nurdiev, who was, returning to the octagon after a long layoff. So loss after loss, layoff from Nurdiev, Chris Weidman coming in and beating you at his age and where he's at in his career. And Sharamagomedov, even when you're getting takedowns, he's outstriking you from bottom position. I don't want to go with either of these guys. And then we take a look at Marc-Andre Barriault. This guy is his last 3 fights are even less exciting. Loses a split decision to Chris Curtis. It was not a split decision. Chris Curtis damn near won all 3 rounds, but the Canadian judges, I guess, were favoring Barriault in that fight. Gets knocked out brutally by Joe Pyfer, a shot right on the temple, and he goes out cold. And then Dustin Stoltzfus, a fight that we did not expect to end that way, clips Marc-Andre Barriault. Both those guys were swinging too, and he just clips Marc-Andre Barriault perfectly right on the tip of the chin, and he goes down. So that's back-to-back fights where Barriault has been knocked out cold. And you're going to be facing Bruno Silva, a pure striker who's 20-0 by knockout. I really don't want to pick either of these guys. Both these guys are on, 3+ losing streaks. Both of them are 35 years old, getting up there in age, out of their primes. I would assume that you would expect Barriault to win a decision and Bruno Silva to get the knockout win. I'm going to go Bruno Silva here. I'm going to go the underdog. I would like to think Barriault could get it done. We saw that close competitive fight with Chris Curtis, and Bruno Silva's just been looking terrible. But based off the damage of Barriault's last 2 fights, Stoltzfus isn't a world beater, and he gets knocked out cold there too. Bruno Silva, his career's on the line. Honestly, I'm surprised he's even still in the UFC with a 4-fight losing streak. So just based off the motivation and the damage from Marc-Andre Barriault, we're going to be taking Bruno Silva to end the early prelims. To open up the prelims, we got Navajo Stirling versus Ivan Erslan. Stirling coming in as a pretty hyped up prospect coming out of CKB, Izzy's team, Volkanovski sometimes, Kai Kara-France, Dan Hooker, that CKB out of Australia. We got Olberg there as well. So the next up-and-coming guy out of that gym is Navajo Stirling. He's a kickboxer similar to Olberg, similar to Izzy, who's taking up MMA. He's only 27 years old, and he only has 6 pro fights. He's got 4 knockouts, 2 decisions. He has a knockout on Dana White's Contender Series and 1 win in his debut in the UFC. And this came versus Tuco Tokos. While it is a debut win, especially winning all 3 rounds, I was expecting a knockout in that fight, to be honest. He came in at minus 1,300. And while Tokos is tough, he's not UFC caliber. And coming in at that big of a favorite, off of 4 straight knockouts, I really would have liked to see a finish. He certainly dominated the fight. He clearly outstruck Tokos. Much better fighter, much better striker. But Tokos did land 3 of 9 takedowns. He had 3.5 minutes of control time. A lot of that was clinched up against the cage, but I just would have liked to see a little bit more action, a little bit more knees in the clinch, damage in the clinch from Navajo Stirling to eventually get that finish. Now, he does only have 6 fights, so it's not that surprising considering his lack of experience, but as he gets more fights in the UFC and in his career, I think he'll become that much better. Moving on to Ivan Erslan. This guy also has 1 fight in the UFC, but it was an L. It came to Ion Cutelaba via split decision. So this came later last year. Cutelaba, a tough guy to fight in your debut. He goes to a split decision, gets outstruck on the feet, but uses his grappling, his takedown threat to win a round or 2. According to the judges, a huge underdog in that fight as well. Not a ton of damage, a pretty boring fight, but he had 5 minutes of control time, used his wrestling when he needed it, and almost got the win versus Cutelaba. Of course, Stirling is coming in as a pretty big favorite. Take a look at the odds here. He's minus 265. They've been pretty similar all throughout the week. You could say the obvious pick is Navajo Stirling, and maybe that is the pick, but I would actually bet on Ivan Erslan. It's not the most appealing pick or bet, I would say. Definitely Navajo Stirling. If you're looking, to throw somebody in your parlay, I would say throw him in there. But I think Ivan Erslan has some decent value. The striking, I think Stirling does have an advantage, but like I said, he has 6 UFC fights. He's shown a little bit of lack of experience in that Tuco Tokos fight, not getting the finish, not throwing. Some strikes when I thought he could have thrown those strikes, and I saw the openings, and he didn't quite take advantage of those openings. And you got Ivan Erslan, who's actually kind of a tough cookie. He has a pretty high finish rate. He's got 10 knockouts in his 14 fights, or in his 14 wins. And yes, he is 0-1 in the UFC, but Ion Cutelaba, a very, very good opponent, at least to have in your debut. Goes to a very close decision. Was knocked out back in 2023 pretty brutally in KSW, but KSW, where he fought a bunch of times, is a solid promotion in Poland, so I wouldn't completely write that off. And then you can even see he lost a 5-round unanimous decision for the belt in KSW versus some, Russian guy who's 18-5. So it's not like he's losing to 0-0 guys on some random ass promotion. But besides that, he really only loses to, guys that aren't too bad. You can see here another KSW fight. Tomas Narkun, 18-6, loses to him for the belt, and then Cutelaba shows up and he goes to a split decision. I think he can use his wrestling to take Stirling down. We saw Tuco Tokos, who's not UFC caliber, take Stirling down, get 3 successful takedowns. I think Ivan Erslan could actually use his wrestling and mix in his striking, because to be honest, he is mainly a striker, to kind of take advantage of Stirling's inexperience, you could say. And we've just seen a lot of prospects not come through, namely last week, Bo Nickel. But as we know, it's been a big storyline. A bunch of prospects are losing their O's. Peyton Talbot, Bo Nickel, Tatiana Suarez, the list goes on. So I would say for the value, I would bet Ivan Erslan, but I think Stirling, you could definitely pick him to be safe. And Stirling can certainly win this fight and outstrike Erslan all 3 rounds. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does win all 3 and gets a 30-27 decision. But either guy could land a knockout blow. I'm not counting out Erslan on the feet either. So, Modestas Bukauskas versus Ion Cutelaba. Now, we just talked about Ion Cutelaba. This guy's coming off a nice knockout or submission victory over Ibo Aslan, who was a pretty hyped up prospect at the time. This happened just earlier this year. He hurt Ibo Aslan and ended up submitting him all in the first round. As I mentioned before that, he did beat Ivan Erslan by split decision, so he's on a 2-fight win streak, kind of bringing his career back, 3-1 in his last 4 after a 3-fight losing streak. So never really a guy that you can count out. Doesn't have a pretty record at 19-10-1, but he's got a nice finish rate, and he's fought some very, very good competition. He is a great striker, a ton of power, but he is beatable on the feet, and he does a lot of the times try and use his wrestling to gain an advantage as well. We look at Bukauskas here. Same age, a little bit taller, a little bit lengthier, has the reach advantage, and I mentioned Cutelaba bringing back his career. Modestas Bukauskas has done an even better job at that. His first UFC stint, he went 1-3, losing 3 in a row to some great competition, I'll say. Krut, Olajechuk, and Khalil Roundtree. Gets cut, goes on a 2-fight win streak in Cage Warriors, attains the belt there. Then gets another shot from Dana, and he's 4-1 in his last 5 UFC fights. Beats a pretty solid fighter in Tyson Pedro. Zach Palga gets the win there, nothing notable. His only loss is a knockout loss to Vitor Petrino, and Vitor has not looked good. Lost to Anthony Smith, so pretty interesting, but he's a very, very, very powerful guy, intimidating striker. It's not the worst loss in the world. Submits Marcin Pracino. That was a crazy fight. And then knocks out Rafael Cerqueira, who came in as a high finish prospect in this UFC, looking to get his first win in the UFC, and it just didn't happen. Bukauskas has looked great on the feet. He's on a 2-fight finish streak. I would lean him in this fight. Cutelaba is no guy just to step over and automatically pick against either, but I like where Modestas Bukauskas is at. He's 5-1 in his last 6 in his second UFC stint. I think he has the better KO potential, and he has more ways to win, while Ion Cutelaba is just a little bit too inconsistent. You see a few wins here, and then he has some unlikely losses, I would call it, and losses that you really don't want to see on somebody's resume. Like I said, he is at 10 losses. He can wrestle, kind of smudge you into the fence, but I think Bukauskas training with the champ Tom Aspinall is really sharpening his tool set here and is on another run in this UFC division where I think he's having success already and will continue to have success, and he might even get a ranked opponent top 15 win at this rate. Moving on, Andrade versus Jasudavicius. The old tough cookie, Jessica Andrade, comes in surprisingly 3 years younger than Jasudavicius, because you can see she has 29 career fights compared to Jasmine's 16. It just seems like she's a little bit too far gone in her career, I will say. Maybe it is his career. A ton of UFC experience. As you may know, Andrade has been in the game for a while, many years, and like I said, it just seems like she's fallen off. She's certainly not at her prime. She's not fighting for the belt. She did win 2 in a row, back in 23 and 24, but was on a 3-fight losing streak, all finishes before that. Just lost to a nice prospect, I'll say, in Silva, who we'll get to later this card, but a split versus Marina Rodriguez. She has not been winning at all. She just retired actually last week, so a win that can be reasoned against. Mackenzie Dern knockout, that's nice to see, but you look at the competition before that, she got finished 3 times in a row. She's a well-rounded fighter, good striker, can take your back, she suplex Rose Namajunas out cold. So we have seen some very, very exciting performances from Andrade, but those performances have just been a little bit too long ago. When it comes to the resume and who she's fought, honestly, not a lot of resumes compared to hers. Kovalkiewicz, Tisha Pennington, Rose Namajunas, Zhang Wei Li, Valentina Shevchenko. I'm sure you guys know who those names are. Yan Jiaonan, Erin Blanchfield. The list goes on. Multiple title shots, title winner, but I just think at this point in her career, it's probably a little bit too late, especially when you look at Jasmine Jasudavicius with a 6-inch reach advantage. She's 13-3. She's never been finished. She's 4-0 in her last 4 fights, and I love WMMA fighters who just know how to win. They know how to ride out to the decisions. And especially the grapplers, they know what they're doing. She submitted Capoeira, and she got unanimous decisions over Bueno Silva and Fatima Klein, also submitting Ariana De Silva, or Ariane Lipski, if you may know her. She's just an overall better fighter, at least at this point in their respective careers. Even though she is 3 years older, she's hungrier, she's more in her prime, and I would expect her to win this fight. Next up, Mike Malott versus Charles Radtke to end the prelims. This is a pretty underrated fight. Mike Malott, as we know, the guy that got fraud checked by Neil Magny, came into that fight undefeated in the UFC, 100% finish rate, was doing pretty well versus Neil Magny. He won the first 2 rounds, and eventually Neil Magny just kind of broke him and held him down on the ground and just got the ground and pound TKO. So wild to see that, because he was 3-0 with 3 finishes in the UFC. We're saying finally there's a good Canadian prospect, but just didn't happen for Mike Malott, and he was a huge favorite versus Neil as well. Comes back later that year, gets a win over Trevin Giles as a solid favorite. Kind of was expecting a finish, but that didn't happen. He gets the unanimous decision. A nice performance, although he didn't get the finish. It is what it is. And taking a look at Charles Radtke, this guy is he's okay. He's nothing special. He's 10-4. He's got nice boxing. He's got nice power. He doesn't have a ton of experience in his career, and especially in the UFC. He is 3-1 in the UFC, but Blood Diamond, I mean, this guy's 3-3. Gilbert Urbina, first round knockout. Semelsberger came back with a first round knockout over Semelsberger after that Protez knockout loss. He's a solid fighter, who really is. I just think Malott is too well rounded, too slick, a little bit more experienced. you have to pick Mike Malott in this fight in Canada. He's got great power. He's a great striker, but he's also got good jiu-jitsu. We see plenty of submission wins on his resume. Charles Radtke, he really just has his boxing, his pressure, and his power. And while that's a pretty good recipe for success, he just doesn't have the experience and quite the skill set, at least to beat somebody like Mike Malott. Anybody worse than Mike Malott, I would give Radtke a real good shot to win that fight, but I think Mike Malott in Canada going to be taking things a little bit slowly, going to be smarter, definitely learning from that Neil Magny fight, and I would expect this fight to end in a finish, to be honest, because I think Mike Malott will try to put on an entertaining performance and get the finish as well. Taking it slower in the early rounds, the second half of the fight, really going for Charles Radtke's head and getting back in the win column on a win streak in Canada. And it'll hype up that crowd. And here it is to open up the main card, the fight that everybody wants to see. Benoit Saint-Denis taking on his short notice opponent, Kyle Prepolec. Honestly, I don't know who this guy is, and it really doesn't matter. Benoit, coming in at minus 1,300, is going to smash this Wolfgang Guy. Benoit's going to run through this guy. He's going to steamroll this guy, whatever you want to call it. He needs a win desperately, and this is the perfect guy to do it. This fight was originally Benoit versus Yoel Alvarez for a spot in the rankings. Of course, every little bit of joy that I get from these cards is taken out of me with people pulling out left and right. It happens every pay-per-view, and honestly, every main card of the pay-per-view as well. Yoel Alvarez pulls out, all of a sudden he gets matched up versus Benoit Saint-Denis, and all of a sudden he's too big for the weight class and he's moving up to welterweight. Seems a little bit fishy. The first time I've ever seen somebody pull out straight of fear of his opponent, and that's what Yoel Alvarez did. Either way, you got guys like Matthias Rebecki calling to fill in versus Benoit Saint-Denis. You got Mauricio Ruffi calling to fill in versus Benoit Saint-Denis. And Dana, being the mastermind matchmaker that he is, says, all right, well, we don't want to see any good fights, any exciting fights. So let's get this 18-8 Kyle Prepolec guy to fill in as a plus 700 underdog who's 35 years old and hasn't fought this year. So I just don't know what to say. Dana literally, he might be just tanking the UFC at this point. There's no other explanation why they don't do the Rebecki fight. That would have been much more exciting, and it would have actually meant something. Although the one positive we can take away is that Benoit will get back in the win column. Like I said, I haven't even started breaking down this fight yet, but of course Benoit has an advantage in every area. Maybe not his striking defense, because the guy doesn't want to raise his guard even in the slightest. Benoit, an absolutely insane pressure grappler, can ragdoll you, does whatever he wants with some of these high-level grapplers like Thiago Moises and Ishmael Bonfim, runs through those guys, knocks out Matt Favola with a head kick in the first round. His cardio has been insane. His pressure is absurd, and that's his biggest ways to win. He will just keep walking at you, shooting takedowns, putting on the pressure, putting on the strikes. The only thing I will say is his striking defense isn't that great. I can go on for hours about how all three of his losses are a little bit fluky, but the Dos Santos fight, short notice debut, up a weight class versus a very crafty vet, and he goes the distance there. And then Dustin Poirier, in all seriousness, he probably shouldn't have been fighting Dustin Poirier off of a Matt Favola win. I'll just say it straight up. But even then, he was low-key ragdolling DP in the first round. He did have staph infection, which tanked his cardio completely. And unfortunately, that combined with his abysmal striking defense, he did get knocked out. And then the Moicano fight, first round wasn't the best. I think Moicano just barely squeaked out that first round. And then he literally wins the second round and gets the fight taken away from him by the soybean doctor that calls the fight off, not letting Benoit go out on a shield. Desperately needs a win to get back into the win column, and I was very, very nervous about this Yoel Alvarez fight, because of course they give him a very, very dangerous prospect in this lightweight division. But Alvarez pulls out, Prepolec steps in, and there's a reason he's minus 1300. Benoit should get the finish, whether he gets a submission or a ground and pound TKO, I don't know, but it should be one of those, probably in the first round. So that's what I'll be going with here. You could call me a Benoit Saint Denis Glazer, but honestly, I'm just a truther. I tell the truth. Should he be in the top 15? Probably not. So I'm not going to completely say that he should be top 5, but this guy is the real deal. He just needs a few fights to prove it and get back on track. Moving on to Alexa Grasso versus Natalia Silva. Silva, 28 years old, on a massive, massive win streak. She's 18-5-1. Too many wins to even count. Pretty nuts. She starts off her career 1-3, and that only win was a DQ. And since then, she's 17-2-1. Undefeated, 6-0 in the UFC. Not a terrible finish rate, 12 out of 18 finishes for Natalia Silva for being a WMMA fighter. That's outstanding, to be honest. Jessica Andrade, Andrea Lee, some okay fighters. Jasmine Jasudavicius, very, very nice name to see on her resume. She had a bunch of submissions just before her UFC stint. She's a favorite coming in versus the recent title challenger in Alexa Grasso, and I think that's rightfully so. Alexa Grasso could just be a one-hit wonder. She came in as a massive underdog versus Shevchenko in that first title fight, was getting beaten, pulls off the crazy neck crank versus Shevchenko in the 4th round, and then she goes to a draw versus Shevchenko, and that shouldn't even have been a draw. She should have lost that, but she looked great in her striking. She dropped Valentina at one point. And then they do the 3rd straight fight versus each other, and Shevchenko dominates her. Not that much damage, but every round she just took Grasso down, and Grasso couldn't do a thing about it. She got held down for 25 minutes, and that was really eye-opening, and kind of showed us that Grasso might have just been a one-hit wonder, because she lost that draw as well. Now, she does have some decent names: Macy Barber, Vivian Araujo, Karolina Kowalkiewicz on her resume, but it just doesn't seem like she's right at where we thought she was at. We thought she was, title caliber. She took the belt off Valentina, but then each fight she had with Valentina, she looked worse and worse. And with Natalia Silva being 6-0 in the UFC, again, these WMMA fighters that just know how to win, know how to get it on the scorecards, know how to pull off the finish every once in a while. I'm going to pick Natalia Silva in this fight. She's minus 235. Pretty wild odds, to be honest, considering Grasso has fought in 3 straight title fights and trains with Diego Lopez. I still like to pick Natalia Silva in this fight. I think she gets it done by decision. Next up, Jose Aldo, the King of Rio, versus Amin Zahabi. Aldo comes in at minus 220. We're all praying for Jose to get a win here. I really hope he does. The matchmaking has not been in his favor whatsoever. This guy just never seems to put down the gloves. And I mean, rightfully so. He's not bad. He keeps putting on good performances, top 15 caliber performances. I don't even have to list the names on his resume, the accomplishments this guy has achieved. But recently, we saw him go to a competitive fight with Merab Dvalishvili, beat Rob Font, Pedro Munoz, Chito Vera, beats Jonathan Martinez in his comeback on a 2-year layoff, beats a ranked caliber guy. So right off there, they should be giving him at least a top 10 guy, and they give him Mario Batista. Seriously, and then they rob him. Now, Mario Batista did essentially what Merab Dvalishvili did, held Jose Aldo up against the cage and did absolutely nothing. Jose Aldo had better strikes, had more damage, had blood on the face of Mario Batista. in my opinion, he won. It was a very close fight, but he put on more damage, and that's what I think matters. So this guy is nowhere near washed. He out of his prime, yes, but washed, no. Amin Zahabi is his opponent. This is the weirdest and worst matchmaking I've ever seen. Zahabi, yes, he's on a 5-fight win streak. He just cracks into the rankings, beating Pedro Munoz, who I don't even think was ranked at the time. And then he gets Jose Aldo. He doesn't deserve Jose Aldo. He doesn't deserve that bump up, and Jose Aldo doesn't deserve that bump down versus Amin Zahabi. Like, it's just ridiculous. So I'm rooting for Jose Aldo. I'm picking Jose Aldo this fight. Amin Zahabi isn't a bad fighter. He's a very smart fighter. Of course, he's the brother of Firas Zahabi, head coach at TriStar, coach of GSP. Very, very smart coach. So, you can definitely count on them to have a great game plan. But fighting Jose Aldo, there's not many game plans you can draw up besides essentially what Dvalishvili and Bautista did was basically hold Aldo up against the cage. It's very hard to outbox and outstrike him, and it's even harder to take the guy down, so that's almost what you have to do. Zahabi's a pretty safe fighter, technical fighter, pretty skilled. Took Javid Basharat's O, then beat Pedro Munoz pretty handily. But other than that, he did get knocked out brutally by Ricardo Ramos, so it is possible. Aldo is just, he's so good for his age. He's probably early 40s right now. And he's still alive and kicking. Like I said, there's not an easy way to beat Jose Aldo. His boxing is superb. He's still got so much speed for his age and where he's at in his career. His takedown defense is some of the best of all time. And I think he beats Amin Zahabi. Zahabi is around, 13 through 15 in the rankings. I think Jose Aldo is top 10 caliber. Tell me why he couldn't beat like a Henry Cejudo. They should definitely do that fight next. That would be a sick fight. But Jose Aldo is certainly capable of winning in this top 10 of the bantamweight division. As crazy as it sounds at his age, it's still very possible. And Amin Zahabi is not going to be the guy to send Jose Aldo into retirement. Moving on to the co-main event, Valentina Shevchenko versus Manon Fiorot. Fiorot comes in as the slight minus 140 favorite, very similar to what we just saw earlier this year in the Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez fight. Zhang Weili, one of the best WMMA fighters of all time, the reigning champion, comes in versus the hyped up prospect on a win streak as the slight underdog, and she goes out and dominates. So if you look at it like that, you should be picking Shevchenko here. And I'm not saying Fiorot doesn't deserve to be this favorite. I think it should definitely be close odds. She's a outstanding striker for this division. Never been finished. Doesn't have a submission, but she doesn't need to. She's got outstanding takedown defense, as we saw in that Erin Blanchfield fight. Classic wrestler versus striker, and she just defends all of Blanchfield's takedowns. And when you do that versus a grappler, your path to victory is going to be so much easier. She outstrikes Blanchfield. Dominant fight, especially to get her a title shot. Pretty impressive performance. Rose Namajunas as well. Myra Bueno Silva, another grappler, and Jennifer Maia, Tabitha Ricci. A bunch of really nice names on her resume, so I can see what the odds makers are looking at when making her the favorite, although I don't know if I like it 100%. I think it should be a close fight, but this is Valentina Shevchenko we're talking about. Yes, she had that loss versus Grasso, and she had that draw, but she comes out and gets an absolutely dominant win versus Grasso in their third fight, and that's the only losing she was doing until she lost to Amanda Nunes in a split decision in 2017. She's been completely and utterly dominant, and I think, like I said before, Grasso might just be that one-hit wonder where even after that submission where she was losing, Valentina then, in my opinion, beats her in the second fight and then beats her even more dominantly in the third fight. And while Fiorot is probably the best fighter that she is gonna fight, at least in the last few years, I gotta lean Shevchenko here in this fight. Fiorot, like I said, great takedown defense, and very nice striking. Shevchenko is just, I mean, think about the experience advantage as well for Shevchenko. Fiorot only has 6 UFC fights, 13 fights in her career. She's on a nice win streak, but she just has so much more experience. She's so well-rounded, Shevchenko is. The grappling, the BJJ, she can hold Fiorot down. She can outstrike her. She's probably going to be very patient, very smart, not taking too many risks against this striker in Manon Fiorot. I mean, it's Valentina Shevchenko. We just saw with Zhang Weili her being an underdog versus Tatiana Suarez, and we saw she was absolutely playing with Tatiana Suarez and dominated her. And while I don't know if this is going to be a domination on either side, I'm going to take Shevchenko for the win here. I think this, you know, the odds should be close, but I think Shevchenko should still be minus 150, 160, something like that. Fiorot at minus 140 doesn't make too much sense to me. You could say that Shevchenko is getting old, and she is pretty old at 37 years old, but these champs, man, these long-reigning champs, these, you know, goats of the sport, at least for their division, until they start losing 2 or 3 in a row, I'm not going to call them washed whatsoever. Like I said, we just saw a dominant performance versus Alexa Grasso. We just saw Volk, who everybody thought was washed, get a massive win versus Diego Lopez. So give me Shevchenko to pull out the victory here, retain her belt. Moving on to the main event, we got Bully B, Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena. Belal comes in with 1 title defense versus JDM. Kind of a short notice fight. This was supposed to be Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Belal Muhammad. Shavkat gets hurt. JDM fills in. Was supposed to fight Leon Edwards. He scrapped that, gets the title shot, and of course he takes it to fight Belal in Montreal. Starting with JDM, he's pretty much a pure striker. Has outstanding boxing, outstanding hands, great power. You know, we don't see many guys do what he did to Randy Brown, especially in 1 round. You know, outstrikes Kevin Holland. This was not a split decision. This was at least a 29-28 win for Jack Della Maddalena. Basil Hafez, another split decision. You know, the guy was on roids, taking him down every 5 seconds, and JDM was stupidly pulling guillotines. I would definitely expect him to have better fight IQ in this fight, and even then, he absolutely poured on the damage versus Hafez in the later rounds. As you can see, he's undefeated in the UFC, and in fact, he's on a 17-fight win streak after going 0-2 to start his career. His last win was versus Gilbert Burns via knockout at UFC 299, and while that looks good on paper, we just saw Gilbert Burns in his last fight versus Sean Brady just get dismantled. He looked like Mr. Krabs with, you know, with just the shell. He looked terrible in that fight. He got outstruck by over 100. He got taken down 7 times. That's not the Gilbert Burns we know and love. And to be honest, the thing I'm trying to get at here is JDM was on his way to losing that fight. I think he was down potentially 0-2. Maybe it was 1-1, but Gilbert Burns had Jack Della Maddalena on the ground in round 3, even had his back for a little bit, and was on his way to get the win. And you know, taking a look at that Sean Brady fight versus Gilbert Burns, that even just being tied or even losing to Gilbert Burns in the 3rd round really doesn't look good based off that Sean Brady fight. And while you can see the significant strikes here, yes, Jack Della Maddalena outstruck Gilbert Burns on the feet, had more damage. I'm acting like he lost the fight, first of all. He did Grammy roll out, throw a knee at the perfect timing, right when Gilbert Burns shot in again and got the knockout. But I'm just saying, he was losing in the 3rd round to Gilbert Burns, and it's just not something I like to see based on Gilbert Burns' last performance. He's definitely washed at this point. But, you know, the main negative takeaway, the main critique I have for Jack Della Maddalena is based off a win. So when you put it like that, it's pretty exciting to see what he's done in his career so far, and I like that he's getting this title shot. He's an exciting fighter to watch, certainly, and I'm definitely rooting for him. Moving over to Belal, Getting up there in age at 36, this guy just knows how to win. He's on a massive unbeaten streak in the UFC. Came in as an underdog versus Leon Edwards. Showed him what's up at 5 a.m. in London. Beat Leon Edwards in his home country. Kind of dominated him, kind of didn't. Followed the game plan to a T. Put the pressure on Leon, always throwing strikes, mixing in the takedowns, especially late in the rounds to secure the round W's. Very, very smart fighter, very safe fighter, great at controlling the distance, picks his shots well, very well-rounded, mixes in the grappling when he needs to, has outstanding takedown defense, outstanding control. We all know him for the lack of finishability. He doesn't have any knockdowns whatsoever in the UFC. He doesn't have hands, so JDM definitely has the power advantage and even the striking advantage. But I would have to go Belal Muhammad in this fight. Belal is just much more well-rounded. He's got the higher fight IQ, and I'm sure, just like last fight, he's going to come in with a great game plan versus Jack Della Maddalena. And honestly, he says he has Canelo hands. I'm kind of trusting him, to be honest. Of course, I don't think they're as good as Jack Della Maddalena, but I think Belal is very, very underrated. Gilbert Burns, I just talked about Jack Della Maddalena's win versus Gilbert Burns, but this was before that when Burns was a little bit less washed. But Burns was injured in this fight, so honestly, we can scrap that. This Sean Brady win is looking absolutely monumental at this point. Sean Brady has looked like the welterweight Khabib, to be honest, and Belal Muhammad, the only guy to beat Sean Brady, gets the knockout, the standing TKO of all things. Vicente Luque, Wonderboy Thompson, Damian Maia, very, very good resume in the last 4 years. So based off that and everything I just mentioned, you have to go Belal Muhammad. I will say, though, the odds are really tightening, and I'm a little surprised at how close they are. I would certainly not count out JDM, but, they've been minus 250, minus 230, and then all of a sudden it's back to under minus 200 at minus 193 now. So we're seeing some bets on JDM. Maybe that's just the Aussies rallying and betting on JDM, but I think it'll definitely be pretty close. Maybe similar to the Leon Edwards fight, but I gotta lean Belal Muhammad in this fight. Like I said, he's just so well-rounded. The fight IQ is there, the game plans are there, the striking, the cardio, the range management, the grappling, the takedown defense. Belal really just has it all, besides the finishability, which you could give him a knock for. But I hate to say it, the lack of finishing ability sometimes adds a little bit more safety to these guys, especially just trying to get wins. Not going out there and putting, your head on the line and potentially risking getting knocked out. These guys are a little bit more safer, a little bit more willing to ride out the decision on the ground, things like that. So, I hate to say it, but that does sometimes give these guys an advantage, not having finishability, as crazy as that sounds. So we're going to be going Belal Muhammad in the main event. I'm rooting for Jack Della Maddalena. And a side note, it is pretty known that if Belal Muhammad does win, Islam is going to stay at lightweight and defend again at 155. But if Jack Della Maddalena wins, we're going to see Islam go up and challenge for double champ status versus JDM. So in that way, I'm kind of rooting for Belal Muhammad, because apparently his next defense is going to be Ilia Topuria at International Fight Week. So if you put it like that, that's another reason to root for Belal Muhammad as well. So it's kind of a 50-50 fight in terms of who I'm rooting for. I want to see JDM win, but at the same time, I want to see Ilia versus Islam even more. So I'm picking Belal Muhammad, and at this point, I'm probably rooting for Belal Muhammad too. I don't know why he gets the hate he does. He's actually a pretty underratedly funny guy. He's pretty good on Twitter and all that. He's got some underrated jokes. He's not the loudest guy in the room, but he's no Conor McGregor, but he's a pretty funny guy, and I guess people just don't like him because he doesn't get finishes, but what can you do? So enough yapping. Those are going to be my picks for UFC 315, Benoit Saint Denis fight week in Montreal. Drop drop a like, comment, subscribe. Share this video with anybody you know that likes MMA. We're going to be continuing to post on this channel 2 to 3 times a week, giving my predictions for every card, some recaps, some matchmaking videos, some other stuff, just my thoughts on the current situations in MMA. So that'll do it for me.